on 103.2 FM.
From Leyland to Longridge
and Wood Plumpton to Walton Le Dale.
It's your community.
Your radio.
Your Preston FM.
And that's we are, Chat City on Preston FM 103.2. Thank you for being with us this morning. Stay nice and warm, nice cup of tea or coffee, piece of toast, feet up, and we'll keep you entertained through till midday. Now, I'm sure maybe you didn't know this, or maybe you were aware of this, but on the 16th of February, it was the 20th anniversary of the M65 campaign against the motorway. And I know people often, they sit at home, or I watch the television news, and maybe these days it's around fracking, or maybe it's about other things. And you think, I've got to do something, that's terrible, But how many of us really do something? Well, my first guest did. And my first guest in the studio is Karen Martyniuke. I hope I pronounced your surname correctly, Karen.
It'll do. It's close enough.
Is it close enough?
Yeah. Martyniuke it is. Karen Martyniuke. Yeah.
Martyniuke. Well, Karen, you did do something, didn't you? So is that what happened? You were sat watching the TV news or radio?
Well, dare I say, I was actually listening to Radio Lancashire, but I don't think Preston FM was around in those days.
Is Radio Lancashire still going?
I think it just might.
Oh, right, okay. I must check out if they're still on air. So, Karen, and that was the first you heard?
It was a news broadcast at 7:30 as my alarm went off, and I'd only tuned into it the day before. And I just heard some young people saying that they were there and they'd squatted a farmhouse and they wanted local people to get involved. And it was a group of people from something called Lancashire Earth First. And they're kind of interested. Their interest was in making sure that we put the earth first, because it's too easy to keep trashing the countryside, and then at what cost to the breakdown of communities and all the rest of it. And they just said, we want local people to come along. So I didn't need asking twice.
Right.
The power of radio, eh?
And that's true. We've had similar successes with other things here on Chat City. So, for those who don't know, and I wasn't too sure, the M65 is the one that begins at Sainsbury's, isn't it, at Bamber Bridge, and goes off towards Blackburn.
To Blackburn, yeah.
So you heard it on the radio, and there were already some young people in a farmhouse, and where was that then?
It was called Keyward and Gates Farmhouse, which up until that time didn't know where it was, and it had been owned by the Marginson family, who had had it compulsory purchased, and they'd been literally evicted from their home that they'd lived in for generations. And so these young people had squatted it legally, because there was legal squatting rights, and that then became the base for the length of the protest that were, the action that was at Kewarden at that time, and it was an eye-opener to me to be involved, but I knew in my heart I'd been upset for a long time about particularly the oak trees that had been being chopped down around the area, and didn't understand why. Then realised that it was to do with this kind of motorway that was going to be built. But couldn't understand for the life of me why it was going to be built through what was a nature reserve. Kewarden Valley Park is one of Lancashire Wildlife Trust's nature reserves. Prince Charles had planted oak trees there and expected them to grow to, many an age. And I just couldn't understand it. And so that's why my heart told me to get involved. And my children were really interested in as well, because they played there as children and collected acorns and things that you do when you're little, and so they felt passionately about it as well. And we used to go down every day. I used to drop them at school, go down, do some actions, and then pick them up from school, and then they would sometimes come and do some actions themselves as well. So
and was this the first time that you'd felt strongly enough about something to take some direct action?
I think so. I mean, I'd actually signed the petitions probably about 10 years before that. I remember there being a big stand in the bull ring of the St George's Shopping Centre, and there was this huge display, big map showing Kewarden Valley Park, and them saying that they were going to drive a motorway through it. And I was just like, you're crazy. They won't do that. But I kind of was prompted to sign this petition. Didn't believe with an ounce of anything that they would do it, because it just didn't make sense. So then when it actually did, it was like, no way, it's nonsense. Do you know what I mean? because there were other routes as well, and there were other options, and they didn't listen to the public, and they didn't listen to the petition, and there was a public inquiry, and most of us who've had any experience of public inquiries know that they're kind of loaded on the government side anyway. So I think it was all that. It was kind of the unfairness and when you feel something so deeply in your soul and you think, no, I can't stand by and see this happen. I've got to do something. And initially, my do something was to kind of take food and to kind of offer moral support, but it wasn't very long before I actually did something, real, and kind of stood in front of chainsaws. And I didn't actually. Lots of my friends say, "Oh yes, you went up trees." I did not. My sons did. My sons went up really high trees and scared the living daylights out of me. But I didn't actually climb a tree. But I did stand in front of chainsaws to stop them chopping trees down, and kind of was there right until the very last day. And there was a Greenpeace got involved. It was the first time Greenpeace had got involved, and I think the only time they got involved in a road protest. And the meetings were held at my home, and a lot of the stuff kind of happened via me and the community in the area. And with the Greenpeace action, it was amazing because we ended up with black T-shirts on that said the Rainbow Deconstruction Company,
right.
And there was probably about 150 of us, and 2 coaches came from all over the country of Greenpeace members and then local people, and we set about deconstructing the mess that the tarmac had done, and started planting trees and started planting flowers, and it might have been very kind of idyllic and an idea, but it was kind of a statement to say, this was our nature reserve, this was our beautiful part of the countryside, and we want to kind of put it back again.
And what I was going to ask about the actions that you were taking. What response were you getting at this time from the public and from the media?
The media were very supportive, and at the time there was a guy called Greg Piggott who worked for the Lancashire Evening Post, who was an amazing photographer, but also kind of brought it to the attention of other reporters within Lancashire Evening Post. And it was very, very supportive. Even the local police were very supportive. But because as things progressed, the powers that be didn't think that it was right for the local police to be involved, because it's a bit too personal, isn't it? So then they brought in the heavies from Manchester and Liverpool, who were huge as well in comparison to our local bobbies. But the group for security and tarmac were awful, to say the least. I mean, they were abusive, they were violent, and it was a peaceful protest, and I don't think I'd have stayed involved as long if it hadn't been. And we had a motto that was "keep it fluffy." So if we even saw someone who was getting a bit angry, we would kind of just take them to one side and say, look, it's not worth it. We've got to keep it fluffy, because once it escalates into violence, you've kind of lost straight away, And some of the other road protests around the country were extremely violent.
Yes, I was going to ask. The
security guards kind of in other areas went in with baseball bats in the night and attacked protesters in squats and all sorts of horrendous things. And for me and other women that were involved, because our children were involved as well, there was no way we would have continued to be involved if it had escalated into that. But thankfully, I saw in the whole time I was involved, which was probably over 6 months at the Cuerden site, I only saw one incident of someone who was an animal rights protester as well, so he kind of had a lot of anger about the system, and he put his arm up to hit someone and his sleeve was grabbed and pulled right back down, and he was about 5 of the people just kind of steered him to somewhere else. Said, look, we don't want you here if you're going to do that, because we've got to keep it fluffy, and so thankfully we didn't see any of that. We did see it from the security guards, and there was one incident where a guy who was in his 50s used to go jogging across Cuerden, and one particular night he brought a couple of cans because there was just one tree left, and we managed to kind of drop a rope down and chuck these cans up to the guy up there. And as he ran off onto Cuerden Valley, Group 4 attacked him, and 5 or 6 security guards, and he came back limping and beaten and bruised and bleeding. And the police did absolutely nothing, and it was horrendous. And it really brought it home to me that, you know, it's a big machine that kind of moves to do certain things like that. And but it didn't stop him. He carried on, you know, kind of running around. It didn't quite go near where the security guards were anymore, but it was a public footpath where he was running, so he wasn't running anywhere he shouldn't have. But yeah, it was a tough time, but it was a happy time, and it really kind of brought the community together. And even after the protest had finished, we felt there was this huge sense of community had been brought together in such a short space of time. And some of the women, particularly, because I'd only lived in that area for a few, like 12 months, but some of the women had lived there 20 years and said, wow, you know, how come in this short space of time we've got this real sense of community, and yet we've lived in this area for all this time. So then we looked at other ways as well of how to kind of continue with that sense of community and sense of family, and we started to kind of develop other things after that as well, which was really good.
And what about the politicians of the day? Did you get visits from politicians? Were there discussion with politicians?
I do remember one politician. He was called Simon Jones, and he was a Liberal Democrat, and he was on the radio that first morning that I heard, and he sounded very positive. I mean, as time progressed, you started to learn how politics work as well, you know. And it's kind of, if it suits, they will get involved, and if it doesn't, then they won't. But he did get involved later on. We did a Channel 4 programme called Speak Out, which was about the criminal justice bill that was coming out in that day, which is the Criminal Justice Act now. And that was about the eroding of people's rights to protest, really. And so he did get involved in that, but that was kind of mainly because he knew a lot about the Toll Puddle mortars, which I didn't know anything about at the time, and so he kind of came on and talked about that. But I think there was a couple of parish councillors that came down, and you know, or ex-parish councillors as well. And I do remember one I bumped into in the photocopiers in Bamberbridge. We used to get loads of stuff photocopied hand out. And I remember him saying to me, you need to check out about the Enclosures Act, which I knew nothing about. And in those days, you didn't have the internet access like you do today. Tried to research it, couldn't find anything. Told all the kind of guys from Lancashire Earth First, didn't mean anything to them, but it turns out that Cuerden Valley was not enclosed under the Enclosures Act, so it was technically common land, and nothing should be built on common land. It's kind of against the law. So had we really kind of understood the whys and wherefores, maybe we would have been able to do something. Because I did hear a story years later of a guy down south somewhere, and he was a parish councillor. He'd only just come to the area, became a parish councillor, found out that they were trying to build on common land, and eventually campaigned, and they had to remove a bridge over a road as well because it was built on common land. So sometimes it's, you know, you need to kind of know things, don't you, really? But with the internet these days, I'm sure actions would be far easier. And especially when you think about Facebook and things, if you wanted to organise
and communicate.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
how long did the protest continue for then?
It carried on for about 6 months in total, and then it moved because the motorway was going through Brindle, and again another picturesque part of the world, beautiful part of the world, and then across through the canal towards Blackburn and through Stanworth Valley, which again was another, it wasn't a nature reserve as such, but it was still a beautiful, untouched part of the world. And I remember being one of the ones that had to drive everybody to do the first recce. I was like, what's a recce? I don't know. So, but I took them down there. And we just went, and it was almost like going in the middle of a rainforest. It was beautiful. It was serene. There was, you know, you couldn't see the sky for trees. So beautiful. And sadly, that was the next part of the kind of destruction that was part of the motorway. And that is completely, you know.
So I have often wondered when I've, looked at people protesting, do you, as you say, you were protesting for all those months, do you then get to a point where you actually realise that there's nothing going to be gained by continuing? Is that how a protest ends? I think there was an element of that, but the nice thing for us, because you get a lot of criticism from people, say, oh, you're wasting your time and I don't know why you bother and you're not going to get anywhere. And I am a firm believer that, if we all sat back and said I'm not going to do anything because it might not change anything, then the world would be a really sorry state of affairs. But
it really made, and I think particularly because that was the first non-violent protest. It was peaceful, and it was peaceful throughout, and so people have to start taking up and taking notice when there isn't violence, because when there's violence you kind of go, oh well, take no notice, they're just in it just because but because it wasn't like that. And around that time they had the Royal Commission on road building, and all the road building programme was squashed. And for me that was a massive it might not have stopped the M65 road being built, but it made the government look at what was happening, because you can't keep building roads all the time. You've got to look at the transport infrastructure and things like that, because we've all sat in traffic jams, I'm sure, and just been absolutely in despair. And I'm sure we've all said, oh, there's got to be, another way. There's got to be something different. And how many cars have just one person in when there could be 5? So, from my point of view, we may not have stopped the M65 motorway, but we certainly made a difference. And I think for everybody who wants to do anything about anything, fracking is another one, like you said earlier. If we don't do anything, then we've only got ourselves to blame, because we've all got to take responsibility. It's our earth, our planet, and there's only us. There's only us going to do anything, isn't there? So every little tiny bit helps, I'm sure of that.
Lovely. Karen, can I thank you for coming in this morning? That has been so interesting to talk to you about. And I take it, just before we quickly end, that you still have strong convictions about certain things when you hear it on the radio. These days, Preston FM,
I do listen to Preston FM, of course I do, yeah.
So when you hear things on Preston FM, you still have that strong conviction.
I do. And I'm going to write a book about my time as a protester as well.
Right, are you doing that at the moment?
I've started it, yes. It's called Diary of an Eco-Earth Mother.
So we will need to bring you back in and talk about it. You
will, definitely. And if any of your listeners were around at the time of the M65 and they want to get in touch, if they contact the radio station, I don't mind you giving my telephone number and they can text me then.
So if any listeners want to get in touch, if you were involved or around at the time, then contact us at studio@preston.fm, studio@preston.fm, or you can phone in. Karen, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you've got news, views or events you'd like to share with us and the Chat City team, why not give us an email? chatcity@preston.fm.